Hi, welcome back. So we're at the last outline of Section 1, the philosophy of theory in Chapter 5, framework and research design. In this outline, we're going to have a quick discussion on the meaning of expression of variables. Now, to start up with, I would like to tell you that quantifying and image recognition in general are quite important principles. So the idea of quantifying and image recognition goes as follows. Imagine I show you the following object and I tell you, what do you see? Maybe it's hard for you to give me an answer in a specific language if the object is unknown or the shape is unknown for you. So I will just skip this for now. But imagine before I show you this image here and I mention the word in English language as an apple. If I ask you an apple. So there is an image, a mental image in your mind to understand what apples looks like, what it should look like. Although the language was used English language, but in any other language it could be the same image somehow in your mind, in my mind, in every human mind that have the same logic of induction. Now the idea of measuring the apple, it might vary. Now if you want to measure the apple, you might come up with certain, I will call them for now kind of variables. Maybe you will measure the apple in terms of the color of the apple, maybe in terms of the size of the apple, maybe in terms of the shape of the apple, etc., etc. So it doesn't really matter the number of factors or variables that you use to define the apple, but we know the mental image for you and I, the apple is apple. So I might use only these two variables to define this apple, but you might encounter to use these three variables to define the same apple. But we are looking at the same apple since we know. But there is another example of this. If I would say dancing as an action, the mental image once again about dancing that express a certain motion or a certain action in your mind, and you might find a little bit challenge more than defining the apple on the motion of dancing, but you still will be able somehow to define certain characteristic in general, maybe the action, based on the action, based on the movement. So it's still a kind of a physical world to define the motion of dancing, but still a little bit challenging, a little bit more than the actual image of apple. But look at this case when I say happy. Now I have drawn this face. Now when I ask you, how can we actually measure happiness? I was able to measure apple. I was, with a little bit of a challenge, able to measure dancing. But how about to measure happiness? Well, that's a little bit challenging more than the previous two cases. The reason is that there is no specific physical elements that I can just use them as I did here. And I say, well, these guys are the actual meaning of happiness, because if I want to use a mental image, happiness could be related to me in terms of a person, to you maybe in terms of an incident, to other person in terms of a memory, etc., etc. So you could see now the challenging of measuring this variable is quite different from measuring the other two. How about coming down to this very first case? Since we don't have a mental image, neither any specific language that can define a certain shape, this is an open way of measuring this variable. So we could agree upon a certain perceptual way that we can use to define this shape. So maybe I could choose a color once again. I could choose size, could choose just about anything that I want to create a new definition of this variable in the space of mind to realize and to understand. So I hope now the idea of image recognition, quantifying, idea of measuring, and define the space of measuring, such as those variables down here, are quite clear to you, all of which will be put into a practical presentation when we reach out to real examples, how to use this ideological and philosophical understanding of variables and expression of them. And now we are actually ready to move on to the next section of chapter 5, and that is to discuss the philosophy of a framework. I will see you then.